Chances are you're listening to this podcast because you love bringing wedding dreams to life. It's really magical. But getting booked in the first place, well, that's maybe less than magical. Luckily, there's a better way to connect with couples, and that's through Zola, the sponsor of today's episode. Stay tuned to hear more about this incredible opportunity. Hey everybody, it's Andy Kushner with The Wedding Biz, a podcast that provides both education and inspiration for those of us in or interested in the weddings and event industry. If you missed last week's episode, it was a panel discussion about transforming spaces with planner-designer Lori Ahrens, Susan Kidwell of Hensley Event Resources, and floral designer Sarah Winward. Please listen to that if you haven't. You really learned so much. Today's episode is with Brian Leventhal and John Stiers, who are the co-founders of First Batch Hospitality, which brings outstanding wine, culinary, beverage, and private event experiences to various cities with venues that include Brooklyn Winery, District Winery, and Chicago Winery. Each location is a wine production facility outfitted with stainless steel tanks, oak barrels, and state-of-the-art equipment, and each offers full-service private event spaces set against the backdrop of the winery, as well as having a public restaurant on site. Enjoy this conversation with Brian Leventhal and John Stiers. So John and Brian, I'm somewhat familiar with your company's concept, because I'm in the Washington, D.C. area and I have a music and entertainment company and I provide music and entertainment for District Winery, which is considered a popular location for hosting weddings and other events. And about 3 years ago, I took on a business partner, which was one of the best decisions of my career. And so I'd like to start with how you both decided to partner and form First Batch Hospitality. I believe that you both met while you were working for the New York City-based communications company Expo TV. Is that right?
That's correct.
Let's start with you, John. So listeners, also so they know each of your voices. So John, what were you doing at Expo TV at the time?
So Brian and I were both hired at Expo TV in 2007. I was hired on the product management side. Brian was hired on the business development side. It was just a small internet startup company that was kind of bringing video reviews to the world. This was back in a kind of exciting time in 2007, a lot different type of landscape than the internet landscape that's there is now before a lot of the big push in social media. So we were both hired there, and Brian and I both worked there for about 3 years.
Yeah, and when John and I both worked there, we the company had nothing to do with anything that we moved into in later life. But what was important about that, where we started and where we met, is actually what we were doing extracurricularly outside of work, which was us and a group of coworkers went out to this little place actually in New Jersey that taught you how to make wine. And it was a very kind of like mom and pop type operation where groups of friends or family members would go there. And over the course of like 4 to 5 sessions during a year, you would actually be walked through how to make a barrel of wine, starting with choosing your grapes, the various early stage production methods from crushing and pressing and fermentation, all the way through bottling. And you can imagine we were young professionals living in New York City and all enjoyed doing fun things. And we went out as a group to this place and got the whole kind of make your own wine experience.
So that's where you both started to get the idea, but I guess the concept for First Batch. But what about the idea of partnering together? How did that come about?
I don't know if Brian and I went out into the world and said, hey, we would be really good business partners. I mean, really, for us, it all started with an idea. I mean, we were both kind of just enthusiastic about an idea. And I think it just kind of happened really, really organically. There was no sort of thing like, hey, let's start a business together. It was more like, hey, this is a really cool idea. Let's pursue it. And in pursuing it, I think we just developed a mutual respect for each other. And Brian and I were at a very, very interesting point in our lives. We were friends and acquaintances, but we weren't like best friends or people who were both passionate about the wedding industry or passionate about hospitality or anything like that. Like, and I think that was actually a critical thing in our success, is because we approached something without the pressure of trying to make something happen. It was really just, it was something that happened because we both thought we had this great idea for a winery in Brooklyn where people could make their own barrel of wine. And we pursued it, and we were both passionate at the time. And and I think then the partnership and the relationship kind of just evolved.
But I'm trying to understand, you were both at this event and you enjoyed the experience, around the wine. Did you just happen to be standing near each other and started to talk?
We did the make your own wine thing together. So but there were like 10 of us. And we enjoyed it. We were doing it for several years, never with the idea of like, let's do this similar concept ourselves. Then you fast forward to the summer of 2009. Okay. And remember the world in 2009, we're approaching a financial kind of collapse. Startups were struggling. There was just a lot of pressure in the world. And a lot of this is honestly a bit of a blur because it's been a crazy, wild ride for us. But John and I were both sitting together, I think at a bar, just kind of, chatting.
Having a beer, full disclosure, was not wine. We were having a beer.
Yeah, it was a beer. And we were honestly saying, like, we love this make your own wine thing. It was in New Jersey. It was honestly a huge schlep for us to get there. This is pre-Uber. Like, it was very challenging for a couple of New Yorkers to get to New Jersey. And we just sat there, and that's where the idea is like, God, why doesn't this exist in New York? It was as simple as that. But it was just me and John. There were like other people in the group, but we happened to be sitting next to each other. We had this conversation. I think both of us were a little bit kind of discontented with the company we were working at. We were ready for a change professionally. We were at a stage in our careers where we could take a little bit of a risk without too much repercussions. And then the idea took over. We just started to think about it nonstop. And it just kept going and going and going. And that was from August to, pretty much the end of that year. We're sitting over Christmas week in my little studio apartment. We actually sat down and just wrote a business plan and then quit our jobs in February. So like that was kind of the map that it took.
Wow.
Brian actually had been accepted to business school as well. So it was something where Brian had to make the decision on, do I start a company with John or do I go to business school? And I think it was, again, a lot of this stuff, and I think a lot of this, that the evolution of the company as a whole, a big theme that I've noticed is that, you can plan for certain stuff and you can put out your best intention in one sort of way, but the universe and the market will respond to you in a different way, and you have to be able to adjust. And I think that's from day one. It was like Brian said, we really like this concept of make your own wine. We're like, how come no one's doing this in Brooklyn? And we just picked away at it and like Brian said, wrote a business plan that no one ever read, but it formed our ideas. And then we decided to take the plunge in February of 2010 to try to pursue this full time. And when we made that choice, we didn't have the capital raised yet. We didn't have a space. We didn't have a winemaker, which were our three kind of key components we needed to really kick this thing off.
It's interesting while you're both are talking, because like I've said at the beginning, I have a business partner and I had my own company in the music industry for decades. And so did he. And I can't even remember how we ran into each other, but we got together weekly for a year. We took a little bit of time. Weekly for a year to talk about this and to really figure out not only how will the numbers work, but how, would we work well together and how are we going to work together? How did you guys decide how to split up the responsibilities and move forward from that point? Was it a real direct sit down and let's write everything out and I'm going to do this, you're going to do this, or was it more organic, like how you got together?
I think, and a little bit of this was luck and coincidence, but John and I have different overall kind of skill sets. I think they've actually melded a lot over the years as we've worked together so closely for the past 13 or so years. But definitely back in 2009, 2010, we certainly had kind of different areas of focus where, I was more on the numbers side of the business. As John said, to business development, finance. I put together like the original Excel model. I spearheaded raising some capital for the space. Whereas John was much stronger kind of from a operations, project management. John actually handled all the licensing stuff up front, the design and the construction of the space when we eventually found it, technology. And then there were certain areas that were very collaborative, like how do you hire a winemaker, or even some marketing related things. And I think we've continued to have different skills and bring different things to the business. But one thing that we do that is, I think, on the unique side is from the team members that report directly to us, which currently I think is 5, we actually co-manage, which is definitely unique. So we have those 5 employees report to us collectively, and from what each of those employees has a weekly meeting that we have, and it's with both of us. We never obviously want it to feel like a 2-on-1 relationship, but we definitely feel that John and I each bring very different perspectives after certain questions, and kind of collectively get to a better answer working together as opposed to separately.
That's interesting. One more question about your partnership before we then talk a little more about the company itself. Do you have a system for checking in with each other? Do you have a certain amount of meetings, or do you go away on a trip, or how do you manage that?
Well, I mean, Brian and I typically have at the beginning of the week, we have our own, just our group up, which is it's an informal meeting. We don't have like you have to go through this, and this. That's our kind of our regular check-in on a weekly basis. And then we do everything from larger summits to mini summits throughout the year. Honestly, yesterday we just had a 3-hour just kind of sit down session to just talk through.
Just the two of you.
Just the two of us. It was like Sunday afternoon. We both had the time and we had the space to not having like the week's momentum, get a hold of you and type of thing. We just sat down and spent 3 hours going through and kind of reassessing just larger strategic directional things of the company. And I mean, those are necessary as well. And then we typically will do, we're going to spend some time talking a little bit more in depth about 2023 and for the year for us, so we can kind of get our heads wrapped around, what that whole year is going to be like, and what our larger goals for the company are going to be. But, and then we also just kind of have obviously a direct line to each other whenever we need. I mean, we bounce things off of each other. We lean on each other. We act as therapists to each other. So it's a good relationship.
There are some big wedding platforms out there that make big promises about all the bookings you'll get if you sign up with them. But is that always the case? With Zola, for a start, there are free listings and no annual fee. You only pay to connect with the couples you desire, and you're not going to get spammed, rather just pre-qualified leads from couples who love what you do and are ready to get more information. You'll even get those credits back if the couple doesn't respond to you. And again, it's free to create your listing. And these are beautiful listings designed to really showcase your business. Getting started is easy. Just go to zola.com/Andy to create your free listing. That's ZOLA.com/Andy. They'll even start you off with free connections to make bringing those weddings to life even more magical. Why do you think your company is so successful as an event space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And we obviously have a tremendous amount of passion behind this. I think part of it stems from the fact that John and I actually were not in this world previously. And again, we didn't talk too much about the business, but it wasn't the original concept for why we quit our jobs and started Brooklyn Winery, which was our first location. We had actually no intention of becoming the event space that we are today, a little bit of that happened that happened a lot because people started asking us to be that very early on. And there were various people that came into our space and asked about weddings and events. And that was kind of when we started to investigate it. And to come back to your question, I think a lot of that early on investigation and saying like, hey, are we going to like do this? Are we going to like run weddings and stuff? And if we are, why will anyone care? What's going to make us better? I think a lot of those initial questions and honestly looking at the industry, what other people are doing, but also looking at our own personal experience, which I think was a really meaningful exercise. And thinking about weddings and events we've attended and our friends have attended, it's like, what do we like? What could be better? And then building the way we do things. And we do things, a lot of what we do is different than a typical hotel or event space or caterer or whatever. But a lot of that happened kind of early on with just the decision to go into this world.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not typical. I mean, having a wine tasting and that kind of experience it may be something that at a destination wedding or a corporate event they'll go to. You know, they'll bring a sommelier in and they'll talk about it, or they'll go somewhere. But to make that the center of it, the focus of it, so that was not your intent from the beginning. It was to host events. That was not part of it, or was it?
No,
The initial idea was a make your own wine concept where people would be able to come in and make their own barrel of wine, and that they would get in 1 to 2 years after they purchased it up front. And we also we planned on making a little bit of our own wine, and we had a wine bar. And the extent of the events business was, oh, you know what? Once or twice a year, we'll throw a big bash and have a big party for people to come hang out. And then, but what happened was we opened to the public. We honestly struggled a little bit getting people to want to make their own barrel of wine. It was a very tough sell. And then we ended up basically having people come into the space, and they were like, "This is a gorgeous space. Do you do weddings and host events?" And our answer to that was, "Of course we do."
So the aha moment was when people started to ask you about using the space for events.
Yeah. And you could see that when they looked, it started with just look and feel. Like it wasn't on operations and service yet because we hadn't done events, but there's something very special about Brooklyn Winery where we all started. And when people came into that building, usually just to like maybe try our little wine bar we had, or even be interested in make your own barrel, and you could see them looking around, and then they had an aha moment. They didn't come in thinking they were going to be having a wedding or host a wedding there, because that's nothing we did or advertised to do. But there was something about that space that made those folks think that maybe they should get married with us. And then questions started to be asked. And this all happened very, very early on. And when we started to see a pattern, that was when we were like, let's take a look at this and see why everyone's asking about this. And that's when we took a hard look and learned the market. I mean, at the time it was New York City, and realized there was a massive gap in the industry with what people wanted versus what was being offered.
What was that gap?
The gap was people were looking to get married at a space from a look and feel perspective that was meaningful to them, was different, was maybe, we used the word Instagrammable, but something that spoke to them emotionally, but at the same time was full service and high end. So, and really took care of everything people needed. And we were looking, people getting married today, usually both spouses are employed and working full time. And the thought of event planning and having to go from not planning anything to planning the most complicated type event you could possibly do that also has the most emotion attached to it is very overwhelming and daunting for a lot of people. And not everyone wants to like hire outside wedding planners and do all that. So if you could have a space that both really jives with what someone wants from like a look and feel perspective, and then you layer on top of that a full service place with incredible food, great service, and you make it easy for everyone, that's what people want. And it just did not exist.
We also had basically, I would say 2 to 3 years of experimenting and figuring it out to a certain degree. I mean, we started out with hosting our first events, and 3 years later, the events that we were hosting were completely different than what we had started out hosting. And I remember in 2010, 2011, and 2012, we have a space where we had a wine bar and an event space and a winery. And we didn't have enough space to where all three of those locations can operate at the same time. So, typically in the early days, we would have about a 50 to 60 seat wine bar operating while there'd be 100 to 120 person events happening, a wedding happening right next door with a full band or a DJ. And it would be happening in the winery, and there'd be a lot of the operation. There's a lot of stepping on toes and things like that. And the kind of the experience that we offer today, and this full package we offer today really didn't start until 2013 when we made the decision. And it was a tough decision for the company. As we said, when we have a wedding, we're going to shut the entire operation down, and we're only going to host. And on that Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, the entire space will be used for a wedding. And this hurt our wine bar business, but it offered us to be able to provide a much better experience for the couple and the guests. And that's basically what we've been doing for the past 10 years or so now. And it's been very, very successful for us.
Well, and just so people understand, because again, my experience is in Washington, D.C. at DC Winery, and the focal point is that room, with the huge steel, all the equipment, and it's a window. And so, as we, as guests, when we walk in, that's what we see. We go up the stairs, we still see it. And then we get up to these various rooms, and it's a beautiful location. And yeah, I think it's experiential in of itself. Any big future plans? So you're in DC, Brooklyn, and I believe Chicago right now, right?
We just opened in Chicago, and we just opened our restaurant, Leva at Chicago Winery. We opened it a couple weeks ago. It's building up some really nice business. We're really excited about it. And then post Thanksgiving, we're going to start hosting events upstairs. So, I mean, Chicago's our latest opening. Like you said, we opened in 2017. We opened District Winery, which was kind of our version 2.0, and really kind of solidified the type of physical space we want. So District Winery, unlike the current Brooklyn Winery space, it has a full restaurant. Mm-hmm. And Chicago Winery is also designed this way. We have a full restaurant. We have a full event space. They can host 200 person weddings at those locations. And then we have a full working winery as well. And all three of those parts of the operation, the restaurant, the events, and the winery, all now operate on their own. Whereas the current Brooklyn space, we currently can't do that. But the exciting thing is that we are opening we are moving our Brooklyn location at the beginning of 2023 this year into a bigger and better spot where we will be able to have a restaurant, event space, and winery all operating separately.
And are you looking to expand in more cities?
We have a lot of big things that have happened right now. So like the opening of Chicago was a massive project. And then even, opening the new Brooklyn is a huge undertaking with this build out. So I think, John and I take a conservative and opportunistic approach to our business. So we want to get everything open and operating at the level that we feel really good about. And then we will explore opportunities and what's next. So I don't have anything to report or announce right now, but we do have a huge amount on our plate that we are taking on currently.
And just last question, any advice to anyone considering forming a partnership? What maybe some of the most important factors are they should think about?
I think, you can't force anything. I mean, it's like any relationship. You can't just mix two people together and have magic happen. I mean, a lot of it depends on the personality types, the situation. I think what we have seen as successful is if you don't have obvious skill sets that are different, like Brian and I did, make sure you define who is really kind of truly responsible for what in a partnership. I mean, I think that that's something to where if Brian and I were both finance people, or Brian and I were both management people or creative people, I think it would be a little bit more difficult to kind of settle on certain decision making, because we'd probably step on each other's toes. Where I think for like certain design decisions, things like that, Brian will defer to me on things, whereas I'll defer to Brian on finance-based things and sales-based things. So I think that that's and if, I would say to people starting out a business, if you don't have those things clearly defined, try to set it up to where one person has a little bit more kind of like hey, I'm going to make the call. You're going to have to go with it. Cause I think that might help better with some of the relationship dynamics.
I'll add on a different topic, shared values. And values is a big word, but in terms of how people are treated, employee relations, what's the motivating factor for the business? Is it like, are you 100% financially motivated and that's it? Or are there other things that are going to trump that in how you run the company? What are each of your goals? What are your goals in the short term, the long term? And having the ability to have very honest and direct communication with each other, and talking about as much of this stuff up front as possible. Get a partnership agreement once things get real. There's actually something our lawyer recommended. Like you do that when things are good, not when things are bad. Hopefully a document you never have to touch. John and I've never had to touch it, but we did it years ago. So those are some things to keep in mind.
Great. Well, thank you both for doing this today. Again, my experience is incredibly positive at District Winery. And so I get the concept. I think it's wonderful. And thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you very much, Andy. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Brian Leventhal and John Stiers. Check out the website, which is firstbatchhospitality.com. You can also get the show notes with event pics that our guests provided in your cell phone's podcast app or at our website of theweddingbiz.com. And remember to go to zola.com/Andy to create your free listing and get your first few connections for free. And next week's guest is a new conversation with the hugely popular floral designer, Kiana Underwood of Tulipina. And finally, be sure to follow The Wedding Biz, particularly on Instagram at The Wedding Biz, and we'll catch you next week.